Hey everyone, I'm here today to talk about the behavior I chose for my research project. And the one that I chose was aggression towards others, but more specifically, the one that I chose is multiple topographies of aggression towards others. The reason for that is because a lot of research that I found actually showed me that a significant portion of the autism spectrum disorder population has multiple topographies of their aggressive behaviors towards caregivers and non-caregivers. And when that happens, the behavior can be said to be multiply controlled. And because of that, it should actually be treated as multiple forms of one behavior. Because when we treat them as an aggregated source of one behavior, the likelihood that they all get treated as one incorrectly identified function increases, and therefore we actually end up using a intervention that may or may not be the most effective for that individual. Some recent research by Kuhn and Mazurek in 2010 actually shows us that individuals with disabilities can show aggressive behaviors with prevalence rates as high as 49% towards caregivers and 68% engaging in aggressions toward non-caregivers. But the function of their aggressive behaviors can be as high as 17% for the autism spectrum disorder community where it's multiply controlled, according to research by Beavers and Iwata in 2011. When those behaviors are said to be multiply controlled, the most effective intervention for them would be to treat them as multiple behaviors, as previously mentioned. The current study examined multiple forms of aggressive behavior in a fashion similar to that of Derby et al. In 1994. They showed us a revised version of Iwata's standard functional analysis that allows us to examine multiple topographies of a single behavior and therefore treat it as multiple behaviors to come up with a more effective intervention for them. The behaviors that I chose for this is going to be hitting others, throwing objects, and headbutting. Once the functions of those behaviors are going to be clearly identified using the methods I'm going to describe shortly, I used an alternating treatment design to determine the most effective treatment for each varying topography of aggression. The participant that I chose to use for this study is going to be an individual who will hereafter be referred to as Jeff, a 17-year-old boy diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Jeff does not have a lot of communicative behaviors. He does communicate to his caregivers, peers, and parents primarily through his AAC device, which he uses to formulate short sentences of maybe 3 to 5 words. The reason for this pertinent information shows us that Jeff doesn't have the best abilities to communicate his wants and needs to his parents and caregivers, and that they think this might be part of the reason that he's engaging in these behaviors. For Jeff's behaviors, hitting was the topography of aggression that occurred most frequently and across the most environments. And the reason for his selection in the study is because it was believed that his aggression in that manner varied so greatly across the environments that the perceived function that they thought was attention might be automatically reinforced, it might be escape maintained, it could be multiply maintained, as we previously mentioned. So once the functions of Jeff's behaviors were clearly identified across headbutting, throwing objects, and hitting others, the treatment options are going to be compared using an alternating treatment design to determine the most effective interventions for each topography of aggression. Jeff underwent a previous functional analysis in which all of his behaviors were aggregated towards one singular scope of aggression, which was determined to be escape maintained, as is usually the case with school-age children around Jeff's level of functioning and communicative abilities. The dependent variables that were recorded for Jeff's behaviors included hitting, which it was defined as any hand contact toward the therapist that exceeded a light tap throwing objects, headbutting, which was defined as any head contact towards the therapist, and during experiment 1, which is the revised functional analysis, data were collected on the frequency of Jeff's problem behaviors as they occurred with various alternating conditions. The conditions for that are going to be cycling between a tangible condition, a social attention condition, an escape condition, and an alone condition to function as a control condition. After the successful completion of Jeff's revised functional analysis, experiment 2 is going to be focusing on the treatment of those defined and functionally analyzed aggressive behaviors. The treatments are going to vary based on each topography, and we're going to be testing and comparing two known effective treatments for each topography. Aggressive behaviors that are maintained by attention will be compared using functional communication training and timeout procedures. And aggressive behaviors that are found to be maintained by escape are going to be treated with non-contingent reinforcement and differential reinforcement. Because we're going to be using two different treatments for each function of aggression, the design that we're going to be using is going to be an alternating treatment design. And the reason that I chose this one is because of its efficiency. Although it would be possible to use an AB-AC-AC design to test and treat each one of the behaviors and repeat the processes and return to baseline and show a strong level of control, the same process can be done with an alternating treatment design with far fewer data points between sessions. Using the aforementioned AB-AC-AC design could take as many as 21, 24, up to 30 data points depending on the level of stability and how much control we want to show between each phase. But the same effect can be achieved with the alternating treatment design with far fewer data points. With a bare minimum in mind, this could still be done with as few as 10 to 12, but I'd still like to try and extend this to as many as is needed to show one version of one intervention being superior to the other, which is the point of the alternating treatment design, but also to get stability if possible. It's not required, but it would increase our confidence in which treatment is truly more effective than the other. One of the other strengths of the alternating treatment design over a standard AB-AC-AC design is the semi-randomization of conditions that can be done both during the functional analysis condition in experiment 1 and in the actual treatment phase of experiment 2. It should be noted that one of the weaknesses of this design is the potential for treatment interference, where when alternating between one treatment and another, say the functional communication training and timeout procedures for an attention to function, the effects of the functional communication training could potentially leak over into the timeout procedure, where the client may try to engage in the same kind of response in that condition, which would affect their data. But because the conditions occur so closely together and with such a short amount of time in between phases or between conditions, the idea is that if there were a variable, an extraneous variable that might alter one condition, it would be likely to alter both conditions at the same time. So any extraneous variables that could cause carryover or cause one treatment to be more effective than the other would inevitably occur in both of them. So it would be less likely to lose the level of control that we might demonstrate. So the procedure for this study is going to be done in two parts. Experiment 1, where we run the revised Derby et al. Functional analysis to determine the function of each topography of aggression, whereafter we will actually be aggregating the behaviors as they fit each function. So we'll be analyzing throwing objects, hitting others, and headbutting, and then grouping those into aggregated behavior classes once we know that they actually do fit the same response class. The way that the therapists in the study are going to be recording this in the functional analysis is going to be through the use of 10-minute probes, wherein they'll be taking 10-second interval data on the occurrence of each behavior to come up with a percentage of occurrence for each condition, for escape, for attention, for a tangible, and for the alone condition, which will serve as the control condition. It's hypothesized that with 4 different control conditions, that this is probably going to be analyzed in about 20 sessions or so, as long as we can find a stable trend for each function of behavior. But this can be elongated or shortened as needed once we find a stable level of responding for each function. The background information that we have from staff and caregivers for Jeff gives us a pretty good idea that we're going to be looking for differences in either attention or escape maintained functioning, so it's probably unlikely that this is going to be extended any further than the hypothesized length of about 20 sessions. But as said, this can be manipulated as needed. In the tangible condition, the experimenters will have Jeff in a small room with preferred items around him in a sort of free play condition, where they'll be taking the 10-second intervals during that 10-minute probe and track the percentage of occurrence of aggressive behaviors as they occur for access to tangible items that the experimenter may have in their possession. For the social attention condition, the experimenters will be in the same room with the same stimuli, but providing non-contingent social attention to Jeff while he's engaging in free play for up to 10 minutes to see if the occurrence of behaviors happen when the experimenters are providing that non-contingent attention to Jeff. The escape condition will be in the same room using the same probe length and interval recording data. The escape condition will be in the same room with the same experimenter using the same probe length and interval data measurement, but with the presentation of demands that Jeff is capable of, but that should be challenging for him, for somebody at his level, which is likely to be simple mannered behaviors to have Jeff bring the experimenter an object, move it from one side of the room to the other, or any other simple requests that he is capable of complying with, but possibly unlikely to do so. The alone condition that's going to be serving as a control will be where the experimenter actually is in the room with Jeff, but not providing any attention, using the same probe length and taking interval data for the same 10-second increments to see if the occurrence of any of the aggressive behaviors happen without any input from the experimenter at all. Now, the reason that we're using all of these conditions, even with the information from caregivers and staff that it's likely that Jeff's behaviors are occurring for either attention or escape maintained reasons, is that because we know that his behaviors and behaviors of other kids like Jeff can be multiply maintained, that it's possible that even with the information that we have, that he might be engaging in these behaviors for other reasons that might not be occurring, but not frequently enough for us or his caregivers or staff to notice and make note of that. The rapidly alternating conditions in which Jeff will be subjected to during this functional analysis allows us to remove the possibility of sequencing effects and carryover effects, since we know that what might happen in one condition is unlikely to happen in the next upcoming condition because the order of them is going to be randomized. And therein lies the inherent strength of the alternating treatment design, which is what we're actually going to be seeing in experiment 2 as well, where we focus on the treatments that Jeff's going to be receiving after we've correctly identified the function of each topography of his aggression and aggregate them into response classes based on them being maintained either by attention or escape, or less likely but still possible, social attention or automatic in the unlikely but possible event that they occur in the alone condition. The goal for the inter-observer agreement that's going to be calculated during experiment 1 of the functional analysis is going to be to have experimenters take data concurrently with outside observers who will be tracking the percentage of occurrence of behaviors with the same probe length and interval one-third of the sessions to make sure that the experimenters are getting accurate data. And we'll be repeating this method of inter-observer agreement in experiment 2, where we'll be observing the effects of different evidence-based treatments for attention and escape-maintained behaviors, the aforementioned functional communication training and timeout procedures for attention-maintained behaviors, and non-contingent reinforcement and differential reinforcement for escape-maintained behaviors. And we're going to have them do that for about a third of the sessions. The procedure for experiment 2 is going to be starting with a baseline for the alternating treatment design, in which the experimenters implement a attention condition similar to that of the functional analysis used in experiment 1 until we see a stable pattern of responding for attention-maintained behaviors after we've aggregated them into one response class. Once we start the treatment condition, we'll be alternating between the functional communication training and timeout procedures, where for functional communication training, the experimenters are going to be tracking the number of responses of AAC manding on the iPad, where Jeff uses functional communication in lieu of hitting or throwing objects or whatever behaviors fit the attention function. Since the idea of this is going to be to have two data paths, one tracking the percentage of occurrence of attention-maintained behaviors and the percentage of occurrence of functional communication by Jeff, it would be kind of impractical to use the same 10-second interval that was used in the functional analysis portion of the study. So in this portion, in experiment 2, the intervals are going to be increased to 30-second intervals where we track whether or not the aggressive behaviors occurred and whether or not the functional communication occurred. For the timeout condition, however, since the timeouts themselves are going to take away time where Jeff could be engaging in functional communication, we're just going to be tracking the number of timeouts that occur per that 10-minute interval, and then combine that with the other data path where we track the percentage of occurrence of aggressive behaviors with the same 30-second interval recording system. By continuing the interval recording system rather than simple frequency, this allows us the greatest picture of Jeff's responding, especially when we're tracking the occurrence of problem behaviors compared to the occurrence of functional communication behaviors or other pro-learning behaviors that might happen instead. This does create kind of a problem for the researchers where a lot of data collection will be had, and this problem was potentially addressed by increasing the interval length from 10 seconds to 30 seconds. In this sense, the experimenters don't have to focus as much time looking at their papers as they do looking at Jeff. Once we found the most effective treatment for Jeff's aggregated attention-maintained aggression behaviors, then we'll move on to the treatment of his escape-maintained aggression behaviors. And for that, we're going to be using just the one data path of Jeff's percentage of responses in intervals, because the treatment isn't going to require anything of Jeff to respond. We're just going to be looking at his level of responding in the presence of non-contingent reinforcement and differential reinforcement. It could be feasible to include a data path wherein we track the percentage of intervals where Jeff engages in whichever response is being differentially reinforced. But since we only really want to compare the effectiveness of the intervention rather than the quality of his response, we really only need to have two data paths where we're comparing the effectiveness of both treatments. Hopefully this will paint the clearest picture for anybody who's visually analyzing the data, because there won't be a lot of unnecessary information or information that doesn't really show which intervention is the most effective rather than which response might be the best replacement behavior for Jeff. So once we've reached a stable level of responding, or at least have enough data points to confirm the superiority of the attention-maintained treatment intervention and the escape-maintained treatment intervention, then we'll include a follow-up phase. Although the standard alternating treatment design doesn't actually require the use of a baseline or a follow-up phase, I'm hoping that by including these we can increase our confidence not only in the fact that Jeff's problem behaviors were effectively, that the function of his problem behaviors were actually really identified, but that the subsequent aggregation of his problem behaviors were also correctly labeled, and that the interventions are going to be the most effective for him. With the use of this experimental design and the hopefully most superior treatments that can be chosen for Jeff, I'm hoping that we can tackle the use of his multiply controlled problem behaviors to find the best solution for him. And I hope you guys like this. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I'll be happy to answer them in the upcoming discussions.